This is the Knock&Talk show, an LEO first responder veteran podcast, sharing some comic relief from the street.
Hey folks, welcome to the 36th episode of the Knock&Talk show. I, of course, am your host, Patrick Faulkner, and our guest for this episode is Jonni Redick. Now, Jonni is a 29-year law enforcement veteran out of the California Highway Patrol, where she rose to the rank of assistant chief. And in this episode, she's going to tell us how important the TV show Chips was in her career decision to join law enforcement, as well as solving the mystery of Wonder Woman's jet. In addition to that, Jonni and I are going to talk about some real issues facing law enforcement and the officers, as well as the command staff. And finally, Jonni's going to leave you with a little golden nugget that she likes to call the ABCs. Interested? Of course you are. You always are. You're going to want to check this episode out. It's a fantastic one. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after this.
Legal Squiggles in pursuit, military in Riverside, coming into the city. No vehicle description on a Washington plated car. It's incident 2130.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 36th episode of the Knock&Talk show. I, of course, am your host, Patrick Faulkner, and our guest on this episode is Jonni Redick. And I am super thrilled to have her here, and I can't wait to get into these stories. Jonni is a 20-plus year, almost 30-year law enforcement veteran out of Chips. And Jonni, I got to tell you later on, as we get into the stories, why Chips played such an important role in my life. But anyway, folks, this is Jonni. Jonni, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I can't wait to hear your Chip stories because I have my own.
I'm so glad you do, because you're here to tell us.
Yeah.
So why don't you briefly tell us just a little bit about you and a little bit about your background, and then we'll start chasing rabbits.
Well, you said when we kind of were off camera, it needed to be a short elevator pitch. So I'll try to narrow it down the best I can. So yes, okay. I did 29 years with the California Highway Patrol. I retired as an assistant chief and at the end of 2017. So this is roughly going on my 6 years being retired from the department. I can't believe it as I say that out loud. In my second season of my life, I decided to be an educator. So I am a professor at the University of San Diego for a master's program for graduates in law enforcement and public safety leadership. I'm also a professor at a junior college here local to where I live for administration of justice. And I work at the Post Regional Academy for cadets or folks coming into policing through that college. And so it's kind of a cool experience to be able to be on kind of the front end and to work with those who are already in kind of executive leadership in a space of academics. So I'm absolutely enjoying that. And I also have a small consulting business where I do coaching and training for leadership development and promotional preparation. Outside of that, I have ample time to to be a wife, a mother to adult children. I have a grandson who's 2.5. I have another grandson due at the end of July, 1st of August. And so that's my short a bit about me, but I'm just really grateful to be here.
Well, that is a power-packed elevator speech. I mean, you said you have free time. I don't see where you.
I kept it short. There's other things that I'm sure will populate as we're talking, but I thought that would be the 1 minute pitch.
That is a very good start. Very good start. So speaking of starts, how did you get your start in law enforcement?
Dun, 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 dun. That would be
no
Chips.
Way. Really?
So, I grew up during the era when Chips was very popular, not the remake movie that they did.
No, that was awful.
Which was, kind of corny and had a few, funny moments. No offense, because I go with the OGs, the original. And so it was just kind of a cool show that you watched growing up, and you always thought, well, wow, it must be cool to like hang glide and surf and have a patrol on the beach. And I was very naive. I was 20 and a half years old. I
Okay.
was working in Kern County, which for us in California is kind of the Central Valley around in Bakersfield. And I was a typist clerk for social services. And that was pretty much probably going to be my career the rest of my life, with HR, human resources, working my way up as a typist clerk through the organization. But I saw ad in the paper, real newspaper, yes, real print, ink, the whole thing, had an ad, said the California Highway
Okay.
Patrol was hiring. And I was like, wow, Chips is hiring. Chips is hiring. And the qualifications were basically minimal. I didn't have a college education at the time. I had graduated high school and I went to junior college and maybe had a few units, but that wasn't required. I had nobody in my family that was law enforcement. I was raised by a single parent, my mother. We had a very dysfunctional, broken family, but I thought I could hang glide and I could surf like with the rest of everybody. So I applied. And literally in 6 months, I had a background investigator knocking on my mother's door saying, you know what, is Johnny here? And my maiden name at the time. And she goes, yes. And who are you? Because I didn't really tell a whole lot of people that I was applying because
Ah,
nobody believed that I could do it. Nobody believed I should do it because I was a girl. And they just didn't have any belief in me. Not that my mother didn't have belief in me when she found out. She did. She was highly like, what are you going to do? But you can do it. Whatever that means, you can do that. Um, and the next thing I know, I was off to an academy. Literally a few months later, I turned 21 right before I went in, and off I went. I became a California Highway Patrol officer.
wow. So are you more of a Punch fan or a Baker fan?
I thought they were both super cool. I just loved the way they, I don't know, bounced off each other, got along. I kind of, dug the whole captain thing too. I think that's why I was like, I want to be one of him one day.
Oh,
But
setting
yeah,
that way
oh,
up there.
yeah. But trust me, the whole idea of wearing your uniform like they did, super tight, trying to
Mm,
look all sexy, those uniforms don't work like that very
no.
frequently for many people, especially in that light color of tan.
Yeah. Yeah, rocking the schmediums.
Like, and bell bottom, kind of a bell bottom at
Yes,
the bottom. Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yeah. Oh, goodness. Well, chips had an important role in my decision as well. My father worked for Motorola,
Mhm.
and Chips was great because that theme song, as it spooled up, there's like a half second where the camera focuses in on the radio speaker on the
Mm.
motorcycle, and it's got the Motorola emblem. And I thought that was so cool that my dad's job was on a Chips motorcycle.
Yeah, that is
And
pretty cool.
that, I mean, I was, well, just a slight bit younger. My mom always told me, don't ever ask a woman what her age is. So not
I'm
to,
55 and I'm proud of it.
okay, so I'm not that far behind. I'm 7 years behind you. So yeah, I was, elementary school, I guess. Um, maybe middle school. No, I guess it was elementary school because we were still living in Florida. So it was in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And I just remember that was there. And that's what led me to start watching cop shows to see if there was a Motorola radio and some of these other shows as
Mhm.
well. And that's kind of how I got started in law enforcement myself.
Yeah, no, those were just really, well, you think about cop shows back in the day, those were some pretty, I don't know, I was a TV person anyway, so I love watching, different short comedies and stuff. But the police shows, I think I've watched all of them. I mean, I don't know. You name them, I've watched them, and I didn't
Okay.
realize that I was really into them like that because this was well before I got, on the highway patrol. But I just loved watching TV. I think because I wanted to escape some of the things that I had to grow up around. and experience. And so for me, TV and comic books were kind of that escape for me. And it didn't keep me out of complete trouble, but it kept me occupied
Okay.
in these spaces that you didn't really know if they were real or they were make believe, but somewhere inside you knew there were some kind of hybrid of that. But yeah.
So in your early days of law enforcement, things were probably a little more lax than what they are in today's environment. So I remember some of the old timers when I was getting started saying, "Ah, gosh, I remember we used to be able to do XYZ, and you guys now you can't do this." And I was saying to them, "Well, what are the rookies going to be not able to do when I'm sitting in your seat 10, 15 years from now?" Thinking about that, looking back at your time, what were some of the fun shenanigans that you got, I don't want to use the term got away with, but were involved in that may not fly today?
Basically everything.
Everything.
I mean, basically, when you think about all the things that we could do. So I came on, so there's generational differences no matter when you come on in the organization. And so when I think about coming on, and we always call the folks at the top of our, your seniority board, your senior people are usually at the top, and then down at the bottom is your least senior person. And I've been on, the least senior part next to the canine. Like that would be me, the least senior
Okay.
person. And that would be like with 7 or 8, 9, 10 years on. I would be least senior because for us in the California Highway Patrol, you have over 100 commands, and I've moved around throughout the state. So perhaps I started in a metropolitan area coming out of the academy, and I had somewhat a little bit of seniority because everybody, the turnover. But then when I wanted to begin to transfer, I would have to be at the bottom of the board because senior people were coming to the places that I wanted to go, and I would have to stay there a while because it took a while to get people in. And so when I think about going to those commands as a junior officer and having those senior officers there and seeing the kind of things that they were doing, because again, generational differences, literally choir practice was, if it wasn't in the parking lot of the command, it was in the parking lot right next to the command. And that's right at the end of shift. It's while everybody else is driving by. Nobody's even blinking an eye that, you're getting ready to drink several beers and maybe drive home or whatever you're going to do. Whatever your choir practice is going to look like, you didn't have to go hide it from everybody. It was literally right there. Get off shift, and make that happen. And so today you cannot do that, of course. You're not going to ever be able to do that. And so those are the kind of things I think about just you be able to do. I mean, I think about being on graveyards, working with my graveyard partner, and nobody's perfect. Okay. So, this is a judgment-free zone, but
That's right.
the kind of stuff that you didn't have technology everywhere. So you didn't have people with ring door cameras and stuff where they could capture everything within however many feet radius. So after you were done hooking and booking and you needed to go write your reports, oftentimes we'd go find a quiet place that we felt was relatively safe because we couldn't go to the office. And, sometimes you might take a nap in between your report writing because it's 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. You're not off till 5:45 and your eyes are burning and you're tired. And so I just
Because
remember
you had court all morning after you got off that morning. Yes, I understand.
Yeah, so you're trying to get a little bit of shut-eye. You can't do that today because people won't see it the same way. Plus, there's cameras everywhere. People can find you everywhere you are, everything you're doing. So you really can't just have that kind of ease of, being able to take a break for a minute.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We had, every agency has their own code or 10 code, signal code for it, whatever. But we would have shift nap partners, I guess. So your zone partner, you would take a power nap, 15, 20 minutes, close your eyes, and your zone partner would be right there with you awake, hopefully, to
That didn't
yeah,
happen.
you're right. Yes, yes, you're right. But to make sure your 6 was covered so that you could get that 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then you would switch,
Mhm.
so that they could do the same thing, because getting through a 9 or even, 12s, that could be rough if you spent all day in court
Yeah, all day in
after
court
working
or
12s.
all day in court, or sometimes you're working an overtime
Yeah.
gig right after your shift, right? You're doing an extended, and like maybe you just work 8 or 10, you're gonna work 4, 6, whatever the amount of time that you can work in a 24-hour period based on your policy. And you're just trying to get like that little bit of something in between so that, you're
Yep.
not being a zombie while you're trying to work. But there's two sides to that coin, that yes, there's certain things we can't do anymore, because I believe it's important to have coverage of liability coverage over your employees. So for me as a young officer, I was an idiot most of the time.
We
And
all were.
well, yeah, and we didn't have a lot of things that protected us really from doing really dumb stuff. We just would, go out and do things and hope nothing really happened. And I think today we've got so many compliance and regulations and guardrails on everything. And it's really to protect the agency, number one, absolutely, right? You don't money, we don't want that to
Deep
be a
pockets.
sieve and just
Yep.
money to pay out, but it's really to protect employees. And I think it shifted for me when I promoted to supervision, to understand that my job was to protect my people, not just physically getting home every day and every night and being safe, but to protect their livelihoods and their homes and everything else from the things they were doing that were outside of policy, but more so if they were on the fringes of outside of our color of authority.
Right. No, I agree with that. Yeah, a lot of times we need to be protected from ourselves,
I
and
know I did.
yeah. Well, you know, me too. Um, and I completely understand where you're coming from. Once you get promoted into that position of supervision, and you're now responsible for those guys and gals on your shift, to one, make sure that they make it home, but also their, as you put it, their livelihood.
Yeah.
It's important. Yeah. So um, some of the shenanigans were redlined because they needed to be, and then some of them, just because they had to be.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think it's hard today, when we look at engagement of our employees, we don't know how to engage our folks anymore. We really don't. You can have a briefing. You can have a supervisor that can be connected with them, and then you give them what they need, and then you ship them off out there. But organizationally, and from a command level or management level, we don't know how to engage our employees and create this healthy, psychologically safe environments for them to really thrive, not just survive and come to work and show up, but where they're really feel valued, feel seen, understand the importance of the work they do, despite the barrage of whatever they feel is happening in national narratives, whether they're experiencing stuff local. Maybe they just had a complaint by somebody that was just ridiculous and they didn't even do it. Or maybe internally they're dealing with management supervisors who basically just suck, and they've got to come to
there's
work.
none of those. Come on.
Unfortunately, you look at research, and people leave jobs because of who they work for. It is just
Yep.
that simple, and there is evidence to support that.
Yep.
And so we don't know how to change how we've always been to be something that we haven't been, but we need to be for our people so that they can come to work. And maybe we can't be extreme and have choir practice in the back of the parking
I
lot.
love how you put that.
But there are other ways to engage and have fun with employees, to be ourselves when we're in management and supervision, to be vulnerable, and to let people know that they're seen and we hear you, versus we're so afraid of conflict when we're dealing with our employees, and we jump right away to either discipline for some reason, or we're too, harsh, or we avoid because we don't want to have to deal with it. Versus most of the time, again, when you look at what employees want or people want, they want time with you. They want time for you to see the good work they do. They want time for you to just kind of get to know them versus in passing. Smaller agencies might have that luxury. Mid-size and bigger agencies, it's tough when you're dealing with different shifts, different teams, you're moving around. If you're management, that becomes a whole different thing. It's us versus them a lot of times. But there's ways for us to, I don't know, to unarmor ourselves and try some different cool stuff to get our people to feel valued and engaged, and let them do things that maybe you didn't get to do when you came up.
Right.
But now we need to look at what maybe we can do.
I agree. And Johnny for president.
Well, I think some people would really love me, and then some people would probably be like, "What is she talking about?" Okay.
Of course. Yes. With those famous last words that will kill any organization. This is the way we've always done it. And
Shame.
you know,
Shameful.
it is shameful. It is shameful. So, um, any involvement? I know you were with the state agency, and but any practical jokes, any shift fun with, say, the FD or EMS?
Shift fun and practical jokes. I mean,
Yeah, so
um,
for instance, we from time to time, this particular fire station where I worked, we would take the tire chocks and put them on the inside of the dually tire. So when they would go to drive off, they wouldn't see it, and and the ambulance wouldn't roll, or the fire truck wouldn't roll because the chalk was there. Um, we would take Vaseline, like a handful of Vaseline, and put it up underneath the door hinge. So when they would slide to open the door, it would just, slap back at them. Silly things like this that are, the
so
whole brotherhood.
so I wouldn't do those things because you just said it. I work for a state agency, highway patrol, California Highway Patrol. So we're on the highway, we're driving on the highway. That's where we work. We have unincorporated streets that look like city streets,
Sure.
blah, blah, blah. But the fire department was our friends because we couldn't go to the office all the time. So we would find our local fire stations, and that's where we would go do our report writing. They cook really well, so
They
you might
do.
want to stop in there for your break and have your dinner. Occasionally, the things we would do are they would have a basketball court, like a little basketball hoop out there. So, every now and then you might shoot a little hoop out there while you were on your little lunch break. The lounge chairs were really nice, the recliners. So,
Uh,
you would watch, it'd be hot on some days. So, for us, when we have to go in to use the restroom, we have to take everything off. For women, you have to take the whole gun belt off, right? So it was a nice
yes.
safe place for you to be able to go do that. So no, we didn't want to do practical jokes.
Well,
We
it's
wanted
not like they didn't fire
all
back.
to have access to all those amenities I just listed. Okay.
Yes. Fair. That's a very fair point. Um, I will go on record to say they started it. So
Oh, well, okay.
yeah,
Now, if somebody starts something, you got to finish it.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, and I do understand that the recliner is very, very important during the Oprah show. I mean, it's very important. You got
Well,
to
I
be
don't even
relaxed.
remember. I don't think she was really like what was on back then. It was just the
Oh, that's
idea
true.
that you could recline for a
That's
minute
true.
in a safe place. Nobody says you have to sit at a table and do your reports. I can
No.
recline since they're handwritten back then. You don't have to sit
Yes.
at computers like you do today. They were all handwritten. You could sit, chill,
Um,
sip your drink, write your reports, and then go back on and listen to the radio to get your calls. Yeah,
so handwritten reports,
yeah,
uh, carbon copies, I would imagine, right?
yes.
Yes. Um,
Press hard,
4 copies. 4 copies.
press hard.
Did you ever get any reports handed back to you from a supervisor that had the nice red line through whatever they didn't like, misspelled word, wrong sentence, wrong description, whatever, and have to rewrite the report?
Well, of course. And the problem with that is, Patrick, here's the problem with that.
Tell me the problem.
As a young officer, I had a bad attitude. And
No.
so I didn't take that constructive criticism or feedback very well after I started getting my legs under me after I got off break-in,
Okay.
because my field training officers taught me how to be, you mentioned it before we got on here, potty mouth. And so sometimes I would say some of those things and I would get in trouble and I get written up because I just really had a bad attitude. I was just always kind of angry a
Okay.
lot. From my trauma in childhood, I brought baggage. Somehow I cleared the psych and, they didn't ask the right questions or whatever.
Ha, fooled you.
And so they discovered the real me once I got on. But um, yeah, I would definitely get those kind of reports back, but I didn't understand the importance of those for when you're testifying in court or any of those things. So when I became a field training officer, I was just as hard on my trainees as my supervisors and FTOs were on me, because I learned and understood over time what that meant. And so for me, I never was told why, just do it. Everything was
Right.
just do it. Don't ask why, just do it. That was my generation of coming up. But for those I started to train and also lead, you got to help them understand why. And then they're like, oh, okay, I better get this right because it's coming back on you, and then it's coming back on the department.
I agree, and the particular lieutenant I'm speaking of that did that to me, he would always do it on a Friday. That was my Friday, and I'd always have plans lined up because I worked the second shift, so I was getting off at 11:30. There was still time to go out and hang out, and not those nights. Nope. LT would find just something crazy, right?
Hey, but I'm gonna go ahead and defend the LT, okay? Because as I was an LT,
Mhm.
my guys, I think I was called the comma queen at one time. I didn't
I
hear
was
about it
just
for
about
quite
to
a
say.
I hadn't heard it, right away, and then I heard him talking about the comma queen, and I was like, I'm gonna take really great pride in that and embrace that. And so as you go back through this report, make sure that you get all those commas, because if not, I'm gonna capture them since I'm the comma queen. Now I'm gonna really be looking for your
Yeah,
sentence structure and your commas. But yeah, I was the comma queen.
that's awesome. Because that's what he would do, or some silly like or then instead of then. So it really easy to make that A and E, but no, there was the red line that would go through
I
the
didn't
whole
use red. I
sentence.
used blue. I used blue. I never used red.
Oh, that's well.
I didn't want to be too aggressive.
He liked to make the reports bleed, and he took great pride in that. But I learned to his defense, he liked us. Even though he was doing this and he was doing it to be mean, he liked us, and he was, as you put it, prepared us for court. The other shift he didn't like, and he wouldn't
Oh.
do that to theirs.
Mhm.
And some of those officers would get their ass handed to them in court by a defense attorney because they turned in a subpar report. And I learned very quickly. No, let me restate. I learned very slowly. But after my first time in the hot seat because of a bad report, I learned quickly why he did what he did.
Well, Patrick, you're saying something really important. So I know when we're talking on here, we're lighthearted, but we're hopefully also educating. Like you said, I think any officer, whether they've been on a while, but those that are coming on and relatively new, the real importance of that. Because I had a command as an assistant chief. I oversaw several commands. So I had hundreds of people under me, and one command that I had went to, the DA had reached out to me, not the commander, but to me, because they had seen a pattern in practice out of several officers in their reports. And they had had this conversation with the commander, but nothing was done. It had not been changed. And the problem, what they were doing was cutting and pasting from other reports, especially when you have DUI reports. Much of that is going to be very similar, only a little bit is going to change. And it was affecting their testimony, the outcome of the cases when they were there, when they started discovering this. And so it is a big deal. We may be like, man, I can't get it right. Well, take time to figure it out if you can, or get a system. And now I imagine with computers and how we had changed, what was required in policy on how you write and what you do. It just makes you better, but it really safeguards you, the integrity and character of you as an officer. Nobody ever wants to go in and have, the judge or anybody else question your professionalism and your honesty and your integrity. Nobody wants, that's not a good feeling.
No, because those defense attorneys, they all know each other. They all talk. And once they find a chink in your armor, every single one of them is going to know that. And especially in a DUI, which is, that brings them a lot of money, And if they can get their client off on a technicality because you didn't put a comma where you were supposed to, or use the word then instead of than, every single report you write from then on is going to come under that same scrutiny. So you're right. It's for you young folks and old folks out there still writing the reports. It's important to have courtroom testimony, bulletproof reports.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't be complacent. Be professional. Be the professionals that we're supposed to be when it comes to that stuff.
And don't have AI write it for you. I actually heard 2 young officers the other day, friends of mine, talking about they were not investigating. What's the word? Chat GPT, but they were playing around with and experimenting. That was what I was looking for. They were experimenting with Chat GPT to write incident reports by putting in the prompt of victim's name, perp's name, and statute, and let it write it. And I was like, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
Well, yeah, it's a big deal. It's all over on the internet, of course, but of course it's even bigger for academia. High school and college, people being able to use that to, even your resumes, all that kind of stuff. So AI is a game changer, but just as they're creating these, they're also creating software to be able to pick up Chat GPT. And if you say that you wrote this, like everything we sign at work that says that, we did something or we acknowledge it and we're aware of it, and you put your signature on the stuff and then come to find out it wasn't you, or it's not true and accurate, like you said, you're now held accountable to that stuff. And we can't say, we can't bellyache about it and be like, well, that's not fair. It is. If you signed it, you said that, you're on the hook.
Skynet, right? Yeah. Don't do that. Tell me now. For those out there that this is the very first episode you're seeing of the Knock&Talk show, I send all the guests a pre-show questionnaire, and one of the questions I ask is, who is one of your heroes growing up? Whether it was real person, comic, movie character. You already mentioned you grew up on comic books. It was kind of an escape. Here you mentioned Wonder Woman. That didn't surprise me. From the time there was a TV show, and it was a fantastic TV show. I grew up watching.
It was great.
It was great. Lena Carter, folks, absolutely knockout gorgeous. Great TV show. But I have a question for you. Since you grew up on comic books, Wonder Woman had an invisible jet, right? But in the Super Friends cartoon, when she gets into the jet, you see the white dotted lines of the jet, but you see all of her. So my question to you is this, because this has plagued me and I've never been able to get an answer from anybody, or the same answer from 2 people. If Wonder Woman steps into a invisible jet and the canopy closes over the top of her and she's completely inside the invisible, wouldn't that make her invisible?
Okay, so that's an interesting question.
I know it's kind of
for me to provide an answer of some kind.
Yes, I want your answer.
Because I've read comic books. You think I'm in the generation today that researches and Googles everything out to know what everything. No. So Patrick, I have, young adult children. And so like my son is into comics. He's
Okay.
not now. I mean, he's 30, gonna be 31, and we've got a grandson, but he still is a Marvel fan. So he'll look into every detail of every character and their origin story to how they're connected. And you go to a movie and he knows so much about the whole thing that it means so much more to him than if I go to see the movie necessarily.
Right.
But I would imagine from a simply practical point that for viewers of the cartoon, we want to be able to see Wonder Woman in the plane.
That's fair.
Okay, so
that's fair. That's
you
fair. So
have to provide that visual so that we can see her. If not, we're just looking at a cloud. I mean, I'm saying.
you're correct. Okay. I get that, and I'll buy that for $1. That's great. Because I worked on jets in the Air Force, and when a pilot steps into the jet and he or she sits down, and the canopy is see through, I can see their head and anything they stick above the solid line, right? But if the jet is invisible and they sit in it and the thing closes and the canopy is invisible as well, it's like a
Patrick, you're
cloak.
trying to create like a Harry Potter correlation because of his cloak, then he would become invisible. We couldn't see.
Right.
Well, sometimes I think one or two times you could see Harry inside the cloak, but you couldn't see him outside in the beginning. But and that would probably be a Harry Potter person going, I don't think so. We're gonna have to go.
Yes, there is a Harry Potter person pushing buttons on a keypad right now.
Yeah, but the Wonder Woman, for me, kind of, growing up in those 70s it was just super cool because for one, she was like, powerful. She was pretty. She was smart. People looked up to her. And she had dual identities. I think that was like the super cool part. I mean, totally like Superman and every other
Right.
one. Like, you're like, come on, don't we know Clark Kent is Superman? I mean, it doesn't change that much. But having those dual identities is almost like, entertainers today, and like Beyonce, everybody knows Beyonce, and she had like these two, like, Sasha Fierce, and then she had her Beyonce, where she was completely this different person in the album and the music she made. And people may not be Beyonce fans. That's cool. It's not about that. It's about dual identities. And I don't think I realized as a young person I was carrying dual identities because I'm biracial. I'm half white, I'm half black. And so I carried this duality my whole life, but coming from a home where I was raised only by my mother and not having my father, you don't have this great balance of knowing who you really are. And, fast forward into becoming a police officer, didn't know I was going to have dual identities on top of dual identities.
Right. Right.
Who you are in uniform is not always who you are out of uniform.
No. And that brings up a good point and about our dual identity, our almost bipolarism, right? Because when we put the polyester and Kevlar on, we have to go be officer, corporal, sergeant, lieutenant, whatever for that shift. It is paramount to be able to understand how to leave that person in the polyester and in the Kevlar and put that person in the closet and become you once you take that off. At least that was my experience. I mean, I think I was pretty good at it. At least I thought so, until getting a little personal. Until recently, I was diagnosed with a little bit of cumulative trauma, as we probably all in this profession have to some extent or another. But being able to leave Sergeant Faulkner in the closet, close that door, and then go become Patrick with my family was something I thought I was good at, but I wasn't so good at. And it's important to understand how to do that. And the younger you are and grasp that concept, the better you will be long term, both in your career and in your personal life? I don't know your thoughts on that.
Well, thank you for just sharing your own vulnerability, because I think men need to hear each other say that out loud. Women, we often get together. We're communicators. We have emotions more so than men do, especially around things that we're experiencing. We'll have circles of friends that we will share our emotions with. We may not share them all outwardly at work, but we will talk about them, and we'll, cry, or we'll, express that and get that out. And there's evidence that research and evidence that bears out the resiliency that happens when we allow our emotions to actually be expressed. And we have to know how to be cope with them, and how to not let them be detrimental to our overall mental health. But yes, we all carry cumulative trauma. I mean, we have childhood traumas, and then you come into policing and you've attached all these other cumulative things over long periods of time. And that trauma could look very different for all of us, but we're all impacted by those significant incidents in our life, because crises can be defined as a lot of things.
Right.
And so oftentimes we're conditioned to believe that we are supposed to experience those as law enforcement officers and be okay. But I am grateful that over probably the last 15 plus years, we are seeing more and more of law enforcement agencies saying, no, law enforcement officers are not supposed to be okay after experiencing the kind of trauma, the constant hypervigilance that they experience. I mean, you have great people like Dr. Gil Martin, who talks about this endlessly on the roller coaster that officers are on. And I think anybody who, especially young people, read that book from Dr. Gil Martin, which is the survival, can't remember the title of it right off the top of my head, Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement Officers, I think it is. But what it talks about is what you're experiencing when you come home and you isolate. It's hard for you to make decisions with your family. You're irritable, you're frustrated. You might have vices that you start picking up. You can't sleep well, but your family doesn't understand what you're experiencing. They know you're in law enforcement, but you don't communicate and you don't talk to them. But when you understand it's important for your loved ones and family to be a part of your support circle, you don't have to tell them the gruesome, gory details that you went to an incident where 5 young teenagers were in a crash on prom night and they burned to death. And when you got to the scene, you could smell their bodies, the burnt bodies. You could see where, somebody was ejected across, and, they were decapitated. You don't have to tell them those gory details, but you do have to be able to build their resilience for themselves and for you, to be able to be your support, to say, I had a hard day. It
Right.
sucked, versus we come in and we're like, yeah, it was tough. What's for dinner? It was tough. How are the kids today? And then we just kind of pack that in and we carry that by ourselves. We can't do that. We cannot do that. That's why law enforcement is so high for divorce rate, so high for alcoholism, so high for heart attack, heart disease, everything you can think of. When it's okay to start talking about it, sharing how hard it was, and then even getting therapy, getting counseling, whatever that looks like, to help you to understand your own feelings and emotions. Because if you don't, and this is personal to me, even though I'm a woman and I talk about things, when I rose up in the ranks, I felt extreme pressure to be perfect. I am a female. We are a minority. I am a Black female. I'm even more of a minority. And in this leadership role, I am less than 1%. When I became a captain and an assistant chief, that when hard things were happening, I just did not allow myself to experience the emotions until I had a line of duty death with one of my officers. And I did not realize that I was triggered so hard that I could hardly function at home. When I came to work, I was on autopilot, doing the things you had to do, getting stuff you had to do, but I could not hardly function at home, and my children were young at the time. And it wasn't until I got counseling. I finally went to therapy. It took me a long time. I finally went to therapy. I started understanding that what I was experiencing was okay. It's okay. It was normal for me to be broken like everybody else. It was normal for me it to be hard and I didn't know what to do every single second of everything that was being asked of me. And I think if our people could understand you don't have to be perfect, um, but also understand that you need to access those emotions before they trigger.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with, a suspect, or you're dealing with somebody, you're just stopping and pulling over, and you can't control yourself.
Yes. All of that. All of that. And there's a big focus on the veteran community. The 22 suicides a day on average. That's a growing trend in our career field. A
Yes,
sad growing trend, and it's. I feel like it's something that could be stopped in most cases if those people would have talked to somebody, vent.
it's
You know?
hard. It's hard for us to. I remember, the suicides that happened when I was a sergeant. I mean, he was a sergeant that I worked with. He was on special task force, so we'd come into the office all the time, and we just sit around smoking and joking, having conversation. He had a great family, and literally, like in 2 days, it took a while for them to trickle it out to us that he had committed suicide. And it just took everybody by surprise because there was no indication that he was experiencing any kind of distress, any kind of depression, whatever it was that, made him make that decision. And progressively, the department started implementing training early on before it started happening nationally, where we started having training not to press upon everybody, what I would call esoteric things, but to create very uncomfortable conversations about how people were feeling, and in the culture, how they were feeling, how they, if people were feeling like management was too this or that. It opened up to everything. And then you had a clinician that shared some of the things that you need to pay attention to, things you can do to help alleviate some of your stress, how to build some of your resiliency. To that being a training that we did back then, to the department, the California Highway Patrol has like an entire department on Office of Employee Safety and Wellness. And it has a full peer support, clinicians, well beyond employee assistance program. And it's expanding to, so much more. And now you look across the national landscape and you have law enforcement agencies developing and creating wellness programs for their employees that is beyond employee assistance. And I think that's absolutely fantastic.
I agree.
But we still haven't done a good job of equipping our first line supervisors and managers who see these individuals every day to be able to create the connection and safety and know how to navigate those conversations, that if they come in and they're like, I'm going through a divorce and things are tough, we can't just hand them an EAP card and tell them,
Right.
hey buddy, I've been through, it's going to be okay. We need to be able to maybe engage with them a little differently, that helps them maybe recalibrate, rethink about something, come alongside them and go with them. Do we have referrals so we can walk them through the process? Do we have the call where the clinician can actually meet them at their house? What are we doing that breaks old paradigms? Or maybe, believe it or not, Patrick, we have agencies across this nation that don't have any of these things.
I know that. Yeah. I've worked for one of them that just, EAP was what? Was that go in your belt? What is EAP?
Yeah.
And that is sad, but I think it's starting to get the recognition nationally that it needs to help the brush fire grow and spread because that's the speed that it needs to go, right? It needs to
And
sweep across.
we need to be more emotionally intelligent, all of us, to understand that people in law enforcement, we're all very individual people. We are all have differences. We don't all see things the same. We have a common interest to serve and protect, and we take pride in the profession. But there's a lot of agencies that are still not very inclusive for people of color, people's sexual orientation. And imagine the pressure that people can have in those organizations if they're not like you.
Mm-hmm.
And if, and what that can feel like. So we have to just be, if we're about caring for people, and, I'm wearing it's a be kind kind of day. If we just can't be kind and caring about other people, then we're doing a disservice to them too, to the people that we work with.
Right. Our own brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with that. I mean, I started off in the late 90s, early 2000s, and that was still a time where there was the don't ask, don't tell, even in law enforcement. Like
Mm-hmm.
there was a whole sub group or society within law enforcement, within my department, where everybody sort of knew, but nobody talked about it. And those officers were treated different. And they were some jam up and jelly type people, officers, and I learned a lot from them. One in particular, but it's sad to think that 2023 that's still the case in some parts of the country.
It still hits the headlines.
Yeah,
It still hit
yeah.
the headlines. Yeah. And
Well,
another, we're talking about these psychologically safe spaces. I would just encourage anybody who, is watching your podcast, who is in a position of, even if peers, but especially if you're in leadership, to really look at what other agencies are doing, call them up, look at their websites, check to see. I mean, maybe you can't implement it all because budgetary restrictions don't allow you to do that, but you can also regionalize, share resources.
oh yeah,
Might be some great strategies that you can begin to phase in your people. I mean, for example, a local police department here, they didn't have a wellness unit, and they're a mid-sized major city police department, and they did not have a wellness unit. So they got a new police chief, and he did the listening sessions, listened to the staff, everybody. And there's several things, but one of the things that he said that he heard them was that they needed this wellness space. And so he created a gym for them, a place for them to have yoga, meditation. Don't tell me that that's not possible, that
right.
people can have these spaces that can help them to have some downtime. We had a few agencies and a couple of commands where people were doing just what you said, working long shifts, having to go to court, and commuting. They're commuters because where they were working, they couldn't afford to live, so they would commute. So they had places for them to be able to sleep. You could go in and get you a nap before you had to go to court, or take a nap before you wanted to drive home if you were too tired. And you created that space for people where they didn't have to be in their cars sleeping like this, not sure who's gonna, even when you're off duty, we're on duty, we're constantly, because
Right.
we're gonna have a weapon on us or whatever, that we're just, uncomfortable. So the little things that you do to help your people just navigate life, to me, are the things that help them to navigate these bigger things that may come up, because fatigue and stress and all of that become breaking factors when people are, in that depressive state.
That would have been a game changer. Being able to work second or third shift and just having a cot in the break room would have been nice. Not every agency that I worked for did I have a take home car, so sometimes I was a commuter in my own car.
Absolutely. Most people are in most agencies.
And that being able to grab a cat nap would have been great. Dark room, cold air conditioning.
I mean, really, you think about it,
It's
I mean,
small
it's
things.
small stuff. Nobody's saying you need to have, big, expensive, all this kind of stuff, but look around and assess what are some of the small things that you can do. And if you don't know, don't do something you think people need. Take time to ask them and
Ask.
then hear them and then prioritize what you can do and really think about what you might want to do later and communicate through that whole process so they know that you hear them, you are working on things versus you say you're working on stuff and you never see anything. There are things that people can be doing. You really can.
Yeah, and there's not much worse than, oh, we're working on it.
And then you
Any,
hear nothing, crickets.
yeah. Any progress? Any updates? Hey, how much longer there, Sarge? LT, Cap.
Well, but you say something. So sergeants sometimes and lieutenants get stuck between a rock and a
Oh,
hard place because
I've been one. I know.
yeah, because it's executive management that is, affecting that communication and, delays in the process or why something's not happening because they're so far removed from the day-to-day morale issues, staffing shortages. They know it, but they're not out there working it all the time and experiencing it or sitting in those briefing rooms, seeing how tired people are, hearing what the last thing that happened to them on the shift before, maybe knowing them like sergeants do and knowing that their family's going through a difficult time. Maybe they had a loss in the family. Maybe somebody's been sick, any number of things. They don't have
Right.
all the factors. And so I always think about how do you flatten the organization in the sense of access to information instead of so hierarchical how we've been doing it for so long. Is that paramilitary structure is important to me when we're going to a protest, when we're going out to do things. You need to have those lines of communication and do things. But in the organization day to day, sometimes does it have to be so tiered? Because it seems like things get delayed, get lost, get compressed, get confusing. And I know we have rank and we have, great egos and status that come with the rank, but I love those chiefs that I hear and I talk to, and they're out there with their people. They are working the beat. They are in briefings. They are digging the ditch with them. You know what I'm saying? Those are
Yeah.
the ones when you talk to their people are all in for them. They're all
Yep.
in for the organization.
Yep. No, that goes a long, long way. There's Chief Johnson. There was a small agency here in Metro Atlanta. The chief just retired, but every year on Christmas, the chief came out and he worked second and third shift. He would answer calls so his people could go back to the police department and have a Christmas meal, a Thanksgiving meal. He would be answering those calls for service in a round robin so the next officer could go back to headquarters. And that you couldn't hear a bad word said about that chief, and everybody in that agency was just all about the agency and that chief. I mean, that was an officer's chief.
And that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, how often do you hear where the supervisor doesn't even go out? Or
Right.
the
Yeah.
manager, you can never find the manager. You can never find the LT or whoever. So yes, I believe just small things can make a
Yep.
huge difference.
Big, huge difference. Speaking of huge differences, tell us how we can learn more about your consulting and your books.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you. So I do leadership development and promotional preparation mostly. And the desire to kind of start my small business around that was because coming up through the organization, you just didn't have a lot of resources or help when you were trying to develop your leadership or trying to prepare for promotional processes. And what I discovered through trial and error is that if you have a good system and a process for preparation for promotional exams, you can be way more successful. And in fact, you can actually make those lists and you can actually promote. And then the other part of that is developing the leadership that will be needed for the positions in which you are seeking. We don't realize that just because we've done the work as, say, an officer and we're a good officer, and now we promote to sergeant, we go to that little bit of first line, supervisory leadership class that they give us, which is, 80 hours, 40 hours, however many hours your agency gives. And now we're instantly supposed to be leaders.
Right.
And leadership is more complex than that. And so I just had a big passion for developing people to understand their role and their capacity and their potential, but then actually being able to execute it. And so that's what I mostly do. My two books that I wrote, one is Black, White, and Blue, Surviving the Sifting. It is my memoir. It has my life wrapped around my leadership and around those lessons of just living your life with all your fragments and pieces of your childhood with your contemporary life as I navigated my career ladder. And also the title is Black, White, and Blue because, again, like I mentioned, I'm half Black, I'm half white, and I was blue for almost 30 years. But all of that is who I am, and it's also how I ended up leading. So it's a very personal story that's wrapped in to the leadership that's within that. And then I have a book called The Survival Guide to Law Enforcement Promotional Preparation, because it can be a gauntlet when you decide to promote, to figure out, what do I even do? How do I study? What do I study? And all those processes. So the book was developed out of all the study groups that I had conducted for almost 12 years while I was in the patrol. And it refined a process over time where it became a system of how you prepare is how you perform. And I'm just very pleased to say that most of the study groups that I had, over 90% of my folks were successful on their
Wow.
examination tests. And I want to say probably at least 30% were in like the top tiers of being on the list. Everybody,
Wow.
90%, I would love to go 99.9, but there was a few. So I'm going to go with the safe 90%.
Okay.
And I mean, these are hundreds of people. And so I refined that and I said, I don't have to keep it a secret. I want to put it in this survival guide type of easy go-to how to prepare. And then when I coach people, I help them with their specific agency materials that they have. Some people
Okay.
don't even know how to do their own resumes. They don't understand how to respond to the written prompt type things, depending on what rank they're going for. They don't know how to correlate policy to strategic planning to answering questions that are going to be asked, depending on what are those topics that are trending for you and what you need to know in that role. So I get to bridge that gap in how I coach them for promotion with the use of that tool through the book. And so I love what I do. I have a good time, but I also enjoy being, a professor. I love the academic side of what I get to do for criminal justice.
Wow. I wish I would have had access to that. I probably would have made sergeant a lot faster than 13 years.
Well, you're
But
saying something really important because even within that, I talk about what you need. You need mentors, coaches, and sponsors. And a lot of times we don't understand the difference in those. So I define that difference to help you to understand that mentors are great, but you need a coach and you need somebody who's sponsoring you. And that means that's somebody in a meeting or an office that's advocating and saying, we know that Patrick would be great for this assignment. Or when this spot opens for sergeant, we want to look at Patrick first to be coming here. And you don't even know they're talking about you, but because your hard work, your reputation, how you've gotten yourself involved in other activities in the organization, you're not necessarily the go-to person, but you're a go-to person because you get things done when asked. People are going to see you differently. But if people don't tell you those are kind of things to do to set you apart from others, you just go about doing your daily job, not getting in trouble, and you feel like that's enough. And most of the time, it is not enough. You have to understand the whole process that makes you the best candidate so that when you, for one, ace that test and you're on a list and that chief gets to pick the first three, rule of five, whatever the rule is, that they're going to give you a consideration because of certain things that you've done and how you've prepared yourself for the entire role of the leadership position that you're seeking. So,
And for years, I thought it was just filling out multiple choice questions and then
no,
answering an oral interview board like during the hiring boards. But you're right, it's so much more. And
it
I
is so
wish I would
much
have
more.
had
It's so much more.
access to all of that information way back when. Let me ask you
Yeah,
this. What if there's an agency head or a leadership role person watching this episode, and their agency does not have a structured promotion um, procedure or policy? They just kind of say, it's Patrick's turn. He gets to be sergeant this week." Do you do any kind of consulting for those smaller agencies that may be struggling with figuring out
absolutely.
how to do that? How would that
Absolutely.
work?
So for one, it's important for me to understand what you don't have and what you're looking for. And what are you looking for when you're looking for your leadership, depending on whatever rank that is. And then based on the agency, the budget, the capacity to be able to conduct your examination processes, it could look like a lot of things. So for example, you could have the examination. It has, like most, will have a written portion, right? Because that's going to be your policy knowledge, really. To me, it's not even policy knowledge, but it is the common practice that people will take a written test. And so it's just, to me, memorizing information and being able to get the best score on written. Oral panels can be very robotic as well, depending on what kind of autonomy you give your panel who are doing the review. But you have to follow HR guidelines that are based on job tasks, when you design the questions and the exam. If you do an assessment center, that gives a little bit more fluidity in the sense of how you can see behavioral responses from candidates that go through, and you can do those from sergeant all the way up. You have some agencies that do kind of some scenario based things along with a written exam. And then sometimes, depending on your higher ranks, it might just be an oral interview with your chiefs, and maybe city manager, depending on how high those may look, or other HR executives. It just depends on what the agency really is trying to accomplish, what they have the capacity to do. But yeah, writing a name on a napkin and picking somebody today really leaves you exposed legally
Oh gosh,
to,
yeah.
I would hope that nobody's doing that anymore. But also, some of these processes don't also provide for equity for everybody to have opportunities for those promotional opportunities, because they're not designed that way. So, yes, absolutely.
And, and having that structure, because one of my sergeants at one of my agencies got his stripes because he built the deck on the chief's house, and that was not a very good sergeant,
Yeah, so that becomes a whole different thing. So you can
right?
design your promotional process for everybody to get on a list. And then, like I said, that rule of 1, 3, 5, 2, whatever it is, if you're the one that built the pool deck and you are within that rule of 3, they can go in there and pull you if they want to and justify it because you scored high enough for them to be able to pick you. But if you're not, then it should be fair and equitable.
It should be. Yes. Yeah. Johnny, how can people find you?
My name, Jonni Redick. It's JL Consulting Solutions. I'm also on LinkedIn. Please connect with me there. That is really where I like to connect professionally with people. But yeah, just Google my name. I pop up all over the place.
One final thing. Two. First one. Um, if we were to make a movie about Johnny's life, what would you title it if we were making it tonight?
Ooh, if we were making a movie about me, well, I'm just going to say it would be the title of my book, but
Yeah, smart.
that may not catch everybody, because I was like, thinking about that, bad, black and blue. I don't know. I don't know. I wanted to
No.
say badass, black and blue. I don't know, because I'm pretty badass when I think about it.
Ab-
Um,
I get that. I get that vibe.
I'm just saying, but yeah, and one of the things I was thinking about, Patrick, I know we're on a time thing here.
No,
Growing
we're
up
fine.
on all the shows and the ones we've been talking about, I thought it would be really cool that if it wasn't a movie, that it could be a Netflix series. And it could be really a series of my character, but involving all the different people that I worked with and having like a series where you could see everybody else's kind of how they character develop, the people outside of who the main person is, but also see some of the policing that comes along with it. Not like some of these shows that we see that are kind of overly Hollywoodish, but really just the real authentic kind of people that do the job, how we joke, how we cry, how it's tough, seeing those incidents, but through the office, almost like the CHIPS environment, because you would always be in the office, right? They'd always come to the briefing room. So it would be an experience in the office, not always the briefing room, but all of that kind of stuff, but modern day with my character and my life journey. So you would have all those experiences that I share in my book and all that, but character develop those people that I work with in my police agency, and they can make it whatever, agency they want it to be. But I thought it would be kind of cool to do that.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, there's not anything like that on Netflix. Whoever's
No.
out there, I'm just
Who's ever
telling
out there. The badass comma queen.
That's all I'm saying. The comma queen. All right, I could be the manager. I could do a couple of little, pop in every now and then. But I'd want somebody else to play me.
Yeah. Okay. Follow-up question. Who would that be? If you were to have your druthers, who would that be?
Wow. I like Zendaya. So she's like a young actress out there. I think she was in Euphoria. I only know these things because I have a 26-year-old daughter who hits me to all the different TV shows that are out there.
Okay.
But I would think she could pull that off.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Especially the younger version of me. And then we'd have to, change out those folks as they, went through their journey in their career. But it would be a long running series.
Of course it would be. We got 29 years to cover here.
That's what I'm saying. 29 years. There's a lot of things.
There's a lot of things. A lot of choir practice happening in 29 years. Final words of wisdom from Jonni to everyone in the Knock&Talk world.
In the Knock&Talk world, I would just say manage your ABCs. And the ABCs for me are attitude. Try to find positivity and gratitude in your day. B is balance. Balance your boundaries. Balance your work life integration the very best you can. Figure that out so you don't become a statistic. And C is the choices. We all have choices every single day. Let's make wise ones. Let's make the ones that are good for you, good for your family, and good for the department, and good for the people that you serve.
I love it. ABC.
Yeah.
That's great. Folks, this has been an amazing hour. That flew by so fast. And I love when interviews go that fast because, time flies when you're having fun. So, Jonni Redick, thank you so much for being on the show, and for your ABCs, your Wonder Woman knowledge, and the CHIPS. Thank you for being a part of CHIPS, and I'm so glad CHIPS played such an important role in your world, such as mine.
Yeah.
Folks, once again, this has been the 36th episode of Knock&Talk Show with our esteemed guest. And stay tuned. We have some more lined up this month. And until next time, stay safe, keep your head on a swivel. And that's all I got. Jonni.
Goodbye, everybody.
Stay safe, everyone.
The Knock&Talk Show is a certified veteran-hosted podcast. Show your support Tune in, share, and subscribe.